Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you here today. I see you're all back from spring break, jet-lagged from coming back from Florida or whichever beach you spend your spring. Oh no, wait, that's the kids, isn't it? We're all stuck in here in Indiana, no matter what. But it's getting warmer and things are turning green and starting to grow. It's good to be back up here, and it's good that everyone can be here this morning for Sunday school. We're going to look at a topic for the next couple weeks that, I'll tell you how I came up with it in just a little bit. I want to present it first. I've decided to call it Perception is Not Reality. And we're not going to get all super philosophical, don't worry. It's not going to be really deep and confusing at all. God's view of our everyday lives. Here's a quote I found. It says this: perception is merely a lens or a mindset from which we view people, events, and things. In other words, we believe what we perceive to be accurate, and we create our own realities based on those perceptions. And although our perceptions feel very real, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are factual. We tend to see things the way that we see them, and we construct a viewpoint of the world, and we interpret everything that we see through that viewpoint. We see this in a number of different areas, right? But people believe what they see, and they perceive things, and they apply the rest of life in that way. I didn't come up with that quote, by the way. Thank you, Linda Humphreys, PhD, for that quote. I shamelessly stole that off the internet. But we do this type of thing in a number of different areas, don't we? Think about politicians. Politicians are very good at perception is reality. Perception is reality, that's a phrase that we throw around every now and then. The way I perceive things, the way I see things is the way it has to be. And politicians will campaign on a certain topic or a certain, philosophy or way of doing things, and they try to make you see things the way that they want you to see them. They want you to perceive them to be a good guy or a good gal, wanting the best for you, whatever that means, and they try to create that perception in you so that you perceive them to be in a certain way. And then they hope that translates into reality by what? Making you vote for them, right? So they translate your perception that they've instilled to you into reality by hoping to gain your vote. All right? How about Hollywood? Hollywood plays on this all the time, don't they? You pay your $8 or $9 or whatever bucks to go see a movie. Does anybody actually go to see a movie anymore? I don't think so. Whatever. You sit down wherever you see your movie, your TV or your little phone thing or whatever, and you sit down and they play on this very heavily. They create a story, a perception for you. They give you the scenery and the music, all to create an illusion. It's a story, and they draw you in, and they base their storylines and on this perception that they construct for you. In fact, there's a movie I was thinking of while I was putting this together that really heavily relies on this. Right? There's a girl that is transported to a mythical land, right? And she has to go through a series of tasks and events and things, all under a perception of what is going on. And then she makes another discovery, and she has to go on another quest to satisfy this. And in the end of this movie, she comes to realize that everything she's gone through is kind of a misconception of what is really happening, right? And the way that she perceived things to be really isn't real at all. Can anybody think of a movie like that? Total bonus points if you can think of the same movie I did, because I just described it in a really vague way. What? Ooh, that'd be a good one. He said Alice in Wonderland. That is not the one I was thinking of, but that's another good one. Here's the one I was thinking of, right? Wizard of Oz. This girl wakes up and she's in a really bizarro place, and the only way she can get back home is to go visit the wizard in the Emerald City. And so she has to follow this yellow brick road, and she does all kind of goofy things and whatnot. She finally gets there, and the great and powerful Oz gives her a task to do before he will send her home. She has to destroy the Wicked Witch of the West. So she goes out, and all the antics that she has to go through, and she tracks down the witch, and just when she's about to die, the witch gets wet, and she melts into a little puddle and whatnot. And so they go back, and they see the Oz, the Wizard of Oz, and they're standing before this grand and mighty Oz. and they're conversing back and forth about going home, and you promised, and you promised to send us home, and he replies, but while that's going on, the hero of the story, little tiny Toto, right? He has a little trick up his sleeve, and they're talking to the Oz on the wall, and what does Toto do? He runs over to the side curtain that nobody's paying attention to, and he grabs that little curtain and he tugs it and tugs it and tugs it. And from the corner of the screen, as they're talking to Oz the Powerful, you see the curtain open, and behind it is what? This little shenanigan of a guy turning cranks and pushing buttons and stuff. And it turns out that the great and mighty Oz, the one that's motivated everything that's gone on in the movie, is nothing more than a little con artist standing in the corner, right? Our whole perception of the driving force of the movie, the great and powerful Oz, is a complete misperception. Everything she's done is for a person that doesn't exist in reality. And we find out that this professor is nothing more than like I said, a con artist who isn't very good at flying hot air balloons and got lost and landed here. And so he kind of set up this misperception of the great and powerful Oz for all the people of the land. And all the people believe this misperception. And they all count and rely on this great and powerful Oz who does not exist. Anyway, I spent longer on that than I intended to, but it's a good illustration of how we can be motivated by something we perceive to be real, but in reality is not. How about this? Fashion. Fashion relays on this quite a bit, right? What's the phrase that we like to use? The clothes make the man, right? Dress for success. And if I look the part, if I relay that perception to everybody else, then I will be more successful, because that will translate into reality, right? If I look like it, then it must be true. How about, this is the best one of all, advertising. The whole principle of advertising is based on this. I make you perceive something about my product, and that will translate into reality when you buy the product, right? And if I make you think that my cereal or my insurance or whatever, my car, or whatever it is the best one out there, and you believe that in your mind, and you're going to come and buy my stuff, and that will translate into reality when I get to put your money into my pocket, right? Perception is reality. Well, besides just the earthly things, I started to wonder, we perceive the circumstances in our life in a certain way. We think they mean a certain thing. We think we have to endure things or get to experience things. Everything we go through in our life, we create a perspective on, and we believe that to be reality. The question is our perspective of things the same as God's perspective of things? And as I look at, say, the circumstances of my life, do I see the circumstances that God brings into my life the same way that God does? And if not, whose perception is real and whose is false? I hope that's an easy answer for you. God's perception is real, right? He controls everything. He controls the universe and he controls our lives. Sometimes I wonder if we maybe misperceive what's going on, and because of our misperception, we don't really respond or we don't really see things the way that we ought to. Again, this can take place in any number of areas of our life. In our politics, we've already covered that. How about our economics? I'm prosperous or I'm not very prosperous, and why is that happening? How about our health? I have health problems, or I'm very healthy. Why? Why am I either not healthy or very healthy? How about our trials that we go through? How about the prosperity that we go through? I'm doing really well because, or I'm not doing very well, and this is why. Do we really understand why things happen the way that we should understand them? And it's not my job, nor am I able to tell you why God is bringing you through the things that He is. In fact, I'm not even qualified to tell you why God's bringing me through the things that He is necessarily, because we're not very good at deciphering that. And yet I came across an interesting passage in my own reading, and this is kind of where I came up with the idea for this lesson. It comes from Deuteronomy chapter 8, if you'd like to turn there. Actually, Deuteronomy chapter 8, 9, and part of 10, but we'll start in chapter 8. And this passage, of course, I've read before, but as I was reading through it this time, something kind of popped out to me that didn't really pop out before, and it kind of made me think about this. Deuteronomy 8, of course, takes place after the children of Israel have come out of Egypt. They've gone by Sinai. They've received the Ten Commandments. They've walked over to the border of the Promised Land, standing by the Jordan River, and they send spies into the land before they cross over. You remember the story. The spies come back after a certain period of time, 40 days, and they hold kind of a press conference with the rest of the people. And they have the panel of spies sitting up there, and they each give their report. And 10 of them give a report that said, what? It's a beautiful land, but the people there are scary. They're huge. They're fierce. The cities are walled, and they're well fortified, and they're just going to be extremely difficult to conquer. I'm not sure we can do it. Now, 2 of the spies said something different. They said, yes, the land is beautiful. Yes, the people are tough, but we have an ace up our sleeve, right? God is fighting for us. Look what he already did to the Egyptians. Look what he did to the Red Sea. Look what he did for us on Sinai. Look how he protected us on our way here. We can do it because God's fighting for us. But the people went with a majority vote, and they said, 10 of these spies say it's too hard for us. We're going to go in, we're going to get slaughtered. And even the excuse they used, they said, look, we have our kids with us. Our poor little children are going to get slaughtered by these giants in the land. We can't do that. And so the people took a vote and said, no, we don't want to go in. And God came down and he said, you don't want to go in? Fine, you won't go in. I'm going to lead you around through the desert till all of you who are of military fighting age, 20 and over, are dead. You're going to wander around in the desert for a long, long time. And those children who you were so concerned about getting annihilated in the new land, those are the ones that are going to get to go into the new land and take over, not you. So God turned them around, and he marched them in circles in the desert for 40 years until, true to his word, all of the fighting age people, age 20 and up, were gone. Now they're standing back on the banks of the Jordan looking over the river into the promised land, just like their parents had done. And God gives to Moses a reiteration of his expectations of the people and of his law and what they should be following. And that's where we get to Deuteronomy chapter 8. Before he gives them the law, he kind of reviews for them, this new generation, everything that God had done for them over the last 40 years, how he brought them out of Egypt, how he gave them the law, how he brought them through the Red Sea, how they wandered through the desert for 40 years. And he reviews that, and he encouraged them to remember everything that they'd gone through in chapters 8 and 9 and 10. And as I was reading through this, and God describes all the things that the Israelites had been through. And he says, when you went through this, here's why I did this for you. And as you went through that, here's what I hoped you would see. And as I gave you this, or I withheld this from you, here's what you were supposed to learn from all this. And I started thinking, if I had been an Israelite at that time, and I had been hot and miserable and dry and dusty, and had a very limited diet for the last 40 years, and if I had to put up with all the things that they had to put up with, would I have perceived and learned what God would have had me to learn in that experience? Or would I have perceived the whole situation as something very different? Honestly, I'm not sure I would have picked up on what I should have picked up on. And I say that because even in the things that I go through in my life, am I sure that I'm supposed to learn everything God wants me to learn as I go through the things that God brings me through my job, through my home, through my family, through my economics, through my politics, all the things I've listed up here for you? Do I really see things the way that I'm supposed to see things and learn what I'm supposed to learn as I go through them? So let's go through Deuteronomy chapter 8 and 9 this morning. We'll see what they were to have learned, and then we can kind of apply through correlation things that we go through in our lives as well and see if we learn from them as well. Start in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, and I'll just read the verses through you and we'll discuss it quickly. Chapter 8, verse 1. The whole commandment that I command you today you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. Verse 2. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Now, he just gave the first situation here, and he told us straight out what he was hoping the Israelites would pick up. The circumstance in verses 1 and 2 of this chapter, wandering through the wilderness. He says these 40 years he wandered through the wilderness, the hot, dry, dusty desert, where there was no gardening, right? There wasn't a whole lot of lush scenery, beautiful plants and grass and stuff. It's desert. They call it wilderness for a reason. It was rocky and it was not real pleasant. 40 years. That's a long time. And if you and I were standing on the banks of the Jordan in the year 2021, let's see, that would have been back in 1981. Am I doing my math right? We would have started wandering through the desert back in 1981. All right, the second year of Ronald Reagan's presidency. That's how long we would have been in the desert. That's a long, long time. Especially if you were, say, a 19-year-old the first time that you were standing on the banks of the Jordan, right? Old enough to remember everything, but not quite old enough to be hacked off in the wilderness, right? And you got to put up with 40 long years of wandering through the desert. What's your attitude as you've come out of the desert now? What's your perspective on life? What do you think? I mean, honestly, put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself mentally through their experience. What would be your outlook on life? What would you think of God at this time? What would you think of your neighbors? What would you think of life after you've been wandering around? I don't want to say homeless because you had your tent, but no permanent residence, no permanent cities or houses or towns to live in. You didn't own any land. You just wandered around. Every time the cloud moves, you have to move. You have to pack up your tent, pack your bags, and off you go to somewhere where you don't know where it is, but it's probably another flat of sand somewhere that you have to set up your tent on. What's your perspective of life? Well, God tells them what they should have picked up on and what their attitude should have been in verse 2, right? We just read it. It said, "You shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness." Why? What were they supposed to pick up? That he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Whether you'd keep his commandments or not. Would they follow and trust God? Would they obey him or would they not? Now again, we're not going to review all 40 years here this morning in Sunday school. I'm hoping you have a little bit of background knowledge here. How well did they do at their task of being humbled and trusting in God and following him? What would you say? Kind of a meh? They didn't totally rebel and walk out and go back to Egypt, did they? I mean, they kept following. That's a bonus. But they did a lot of grumbling. They did a lot of not trusting, a lot of complaining. God had to punish them a number of times, right, for various things. But he was planning to humble them. That was his point, and test them out. So their perception probably was something like this. We've wandered around in the desert for a long time. We've been not real comfortable for as long as I can remember. We don't own any property. We're not really making progress. We're just kind of walking in circles. Probably what happens is God doesn't like us very much. Or he kind of forgot about us. Or he can't deliver us from the desert. Remember, that's one that they said a number of times. Did God bring us out here in the desert just so he could kill us? We could have stayed back in Egypt and done better than this. You remember that line that they used several times? Yeah. So God probably doesn't have the power, or he can't deliver us. He can't take care of us. Or God neglects us. He doesn't feed us very well. I mean, we get tired of this same old stuff all the time. I just don't like my situation very much. Now, let's be honest. Would that be your perspective as you came out? It'd probably be mine, right? And yet God tells us why he did it. God's perspective is very different than their perspective. The reality is that God is humbling and testing them. Supposedly, they were supposed to realize that I'm kind of at God's mercy here. I'm not a big shot. I can't defeat these nations around me. I can't even feed myself. I don't even know where I'm going out here. I'm totally reliant on God. He is humbling me to realize my status in life, and he's testing me to see whether I will follow and rely on him or not. 40 years in the wilderness so the people could learn that lesson. Again, did they learn it? Well, maybe some of them, but on the whole, I'm not sure they did. But that was God's perspective. That's why he did what he did. How does that translate to our lives? Well, are there things you're going through for a long time that seem unpleasant, that don't make a whole lot of sense? Do we grumble and complain, or do we say, well, I wonder if there's something I'm supposed to be learning here? What am I supposed to see that I'm just not picking up on? How am I supposed to respond in this situation? Right? I've had a job that I don't like for a long time. It's kind of boring. I don't enjoy it. I mean, I guess we get by financially, but I don't really like it that well. How am I supposed to respond? Well, am I supposed to learn something from it? Am I supposed to pick up on something? Am I supposed to see something about God or about my own life that I'm not really seeing? right? That's kind of one that I deal with sometimes, oftentimes, right? What am I supposed to be seeing? Or I've got this ongoing health problem, and I don't like it, and it's been a long time, and I'm uncomfortable, and it's expensive, and I don't like it. Why doesn't God fix this thing for me? Well, what am I supposed to be learning from this? If I was an Israelite, what should I have been learning? If I'm a 21st century Hoosier, what should I be learning from this? How about the next situation? The next one we see in verse 3. This is a good one. Verse 3, and he humbled you, and he let you hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Again, they weren't walking around through the Garden of Eden for 40 years, right? This was a desert place. Stuff doesn't grow out there unless you like to eat dirt and cactuses, right? So God had to take care of their dietary needs, and he did so by giving them a miraculous food. It was called, what is it? That's right, what is it, right? Manna. Manna means, what is this stuff? That's what it means. And so they go outside, and they see this stuff on the ground, and say, what is this stuff? But God says, you pick up this stuff off the ground, enough for one day only, and that's what you get to eat. And it's free. I don't say you get all you want, because God told them how much to pick up every day, but you get it every day. It's free. You don't have to work for it. All you got to do is go pick it up, and there you go. And the next day, you walk outside, and voila, there's more on the ground. More of this what is it stuff. And so you get your basket, and you fill up your basket, and you go inside, and you can boil it, or bake it, or fry it, or fricassee it, or hash brown it, or whatever you want to do. And make a casserole, or pudding, or porridge, or whatever. And there you go. That's what you get to eat. And tomorrow, guess what happens? Here we go. Well, see, yesterday we had soup, and the day before that we had goulash. How about we make a casserole today? So we make a casserole. And the next day, what do? Pick it up. Well, how about manna patties today? Yeah, okay, let's try that. 40 years, a long time to eat manna patties. All right? You know what I'm saying? We had the pleasure of visiting a couple colleges with my daughter this past week. We took a couple days and we drove out to Iowa and visited Faith Baptist Bible College, and we went up to Maranatha in Wisconsin, and we came back here. And one topic of discussion at any college you go to is, how is the food? How is the food? And if you've seen the college recently, and if you have gone to college 20, 30, or 40, or 50 years ago, you know that cafeterias have come a long way since that time, right? I mean, they have buffet style, and they have the pizza buffet, and they got the breakfast buffet, and they got the salad bar, and they got the main entree buffet, and they always have a little thing over here, kind of a what is it? A manna, right? The manna buffet. What in the world is it? Okay? And they switch out the things on different days, and yet inevitably what I hear from the students is, I'd like to get off campus and eat for a while, because I get tired of eating the cafeteria food, right? As if they only served one thing every day, right? Now, in reality, they don't. You can go to this bar or that bar, and they switch out the bars every day. But even so, even with all that variety, they still get tired of it. And they still say, can I just get off campus and go to Burger King or McDonald's or Culver's or Subway or something like that? Can I just eat somewhere else? I want a little bit of... Yes, you guys are so good at this. If you're live streaming, I'm sorry, I'll try to repeat what the people say. They say, I want variety, right? I want some variety. In reality, they have a ton of variety. They do a really good job of giving you variety, and yet we still grumble about not having enough variety. What if the college cafeteria had one pot in the center of the cafeteria? They called it the what is it pot. And every day it had the same thing in it. Then what do you think they'd be saying? Now, they're not staying there 9 months of the year, they're staying there 12 months of the year. And they always eat out of the what is it pot. Now they don't go to school for 4 years, they go to school for 40 years. And every day they eat out of the what is it pot. And every day the what is it pot has the same stuff in it. I see some college kids sitting in the back here. What would you think about the what is it pot after 40 years? I'm looking at you. Newman, I'm looking at you. Well, you were recently, you know what I mean. What do you think about the what is it pot after 40 years?
Be tired of it
Yeah, I'm a little tired of the what is it pot. Okay, the Israelites were tired of the what is it pot. 40 years. Again, if I have to eat the same leftovers 2 days in a row, I'm tired of it already. So let's not be too hard on the Israelites, shall we, for complaining about the what is it pot after 40 years. Verse 3, let me read this to you again. And he humbled you, and he let you hunger, and fed you with the manna out of the manna pot, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. Why? Why did he make you eat out of the manna pot for 40 years? So that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Okay? The people's perspective. I'm sick of this stuff. Why can't God provide something else? In fact, they said that a couple times, didn't they? Moses, we're tired of this what is it pot. We want some meat. God doesn't take care of us. He doesn't care if we like our lives or not. He's not providing for us very well. We want some meat. And so God said, what? You want some meat? Fine. I'm going to give you some meat. Tomorrow this time you're going to be eating quail. How's that sound? You're going to be eating so much quail you're going to be sick of it. It's going to be coming out your nose, he says, almost literally, right? You're going to have so much quail you're not going to know what to do with it. And then we'll see what you think of meat. And so he brings in quail the next day, and they have quail, and they have quail, and they have quail. The Bible tells us how much they collected, and it's just an extraordinary amount for all these millions of people. And then God says, fine. But as he also said, as it was still in their teeth, as they were still chewing it, God sent a plague over them to destroy a whole bunch of them and punish them for their grumbling. Does that sound a little harsh? After we grumble over our leftovers after 2 days? Why? Why? What were they saying? What was the big problem? I'm sorry, what was that? They weren't thankful, right, yeah. And again, I don't want to be too hard on them because I get tired of the same stuff too, and we're built to want variety. And sometimes I wonder, this is just my own little aside. Sometimes I wonder, would the story and the narrative have been different if instead of going to Moses and saying, Moses, we demand meat, we're tired of this man, and God doesn't take care of us, and we hate every bit of it, and why doesn't he do more for us? What if they just said, Moses, we appreciate what God has done in providing food for us. We don't have to ever worry about going hungry. We have everything we need. And yet, we'd like a little bit of variety sometime. Would you ask God if he would be so kind and gracious, even though we're grateful for what he's given us? Would you ask him if he would be so kind and generous and merciful to us if he could send us, a little quail or, something else to eat for a while? If they'd have come to him in a grateful request instead of a complaining, grumbling, angry request, how would the story have gone? I don't know. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly. Maybe God would have said, no, this is what you get, and be happy with it. Maybe he would have said, you know what, since you ask in that way, in an attitude of faith and appreciation and gratitude, sure, I'll send some goodies your way. I don't know. We never know because the Israelites never did that. But their perspective, I'm sick of this. Why can't God provide something else for me? What was God's perspective of the situation? Why did he do this to them? Now, God is the creator of the universe. Did he have to give them? Was manna the only thing he knows how to make? Really? Would it be any more difficult for God to give them cupcakes and pancakes for a day or two? Or, little beef sirloin tips or something like that? Some French fries every now and then? Would it have been any more difficult for God to do that? No, not a bit. It wouldn't have taxed God a bit. He remembers the recipe, have no fear, okay? It's not difficult for him. So why does he choose to give them the same exact thing every day for 40 years? Isn't that a little bit sadistic on God's part? Verse 3, what's it say? I led you in hunger, gave you stuff you didn't know, did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord, the mouth of God. What does that mean? God's word, that is, in this case, his will and his provision, is more important than just the comforts. They're to learn that, yes, God provides, and we are completely dependent on his provision. And what he gives us, we are to be grateful for, and that's even more important, I think, than our comforts. And we don't like to hear this necessarily, but maybe sometimes our own comfort and our having stuff isn't God's primary objective in our lives. Maybe making us comfortable and wealthy and rich and satisfied with everything we have. Maybe that's not his primary objective for us. Sometimes he's willing to sacrifice our comfort in order to teach us good things and to make us grow, to make us realize that we are dependent on him, and to make us realize that what he says and what he provides are maybe more important than what we think we should have. This passage, incidentally, was quoted later on in Scripture. You remember, this passage is quoted, and it comes up again. Where? Think about it. Where do we see this verse pop up again? A certain someone was walking in the desert, not for 40 years, but for 40 days and for 40 nights. The certain someone was very hungry. God could have provided in the wilderness for him as well, and yet he chose not to do so. In fact, he himself could have provided for himself in the desert, if you know who I'm talking about, quite easily, and yet he chose not to do so. Almost the same exact situation as what we see in Deuteronomy. This certain someone, of course, is Jesus, the Messiah, the God-man. He was walking around in the desert, food deprived for 40 days and 40 nights. Is it wrong to eat? Is it wrong to create cupcakes out of cacti, right? Or something delectable out of the rocks and the sand? He could have done it very easily. Snapped his fingers, spoke it into existence, and had a meal. That's all it would have taken. And yet he did not. And Satan comes along and he says, Jesus, you look awful hungry. Why don't you just create some goodies, right? I mean, you did it before for the people in the wilderness for 40 years. You can create food. Even manna would sound pretty good to you right now, probably, after not having eaten for a long time. Why don't you just do it? And the same principle they were to have learned back in Deuteronomy, Jesus quotes to Satan in the Gospels. And he says what? No, I'm not going to, because man isn't supposed to live by bread alone, but instead by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, by doing God's will and listening and obeying to what he says. That is more important, that takes higher priority than my comfort and my, can I use the phrase perceived needs sometimes? So in our life, maybe sometimes I don't think what I should have. Maybe my car is 18 years old and I'd like a new one. Maybe the job I have isn't the one I think I would like. Maybe my health or something else in my life isn't the way I think. And my first response is to say, God, you're the all-powerful creator. Why don't you create something better for me? You can do it. And maybe the perspective I'm supposed to have is what? What am I supposed to see here? What are my priorities supposed to be? Maybe God's top priority isn't my comfort. Maybe I'm supposed to realize what's really important. Maybe going through what he has for me to go through is more valuable to me than having whatever it is I want to have. Maybe living by God's word is more important than the bread that I would like to taste right now. And I'm talking to you as much as I'm talking to myself, probably myself more so, because I find myself in the same situation. You know, things would be so much better if I could just, or if I could just have, or if I could just go through, or if I could just experience. And maybe that's just not what God has for you. And maybe God's top priority is not making you comfortable. Sorry, maybe it's not. Maybe he has a higher purpose. And again, I'm talking to myself more than anybody else. 9:33. We are not making it through Deuteronomy 8 today. Let's do one more slide and we'll finish up next week. Does that sound good? Because this whole chapter is packed full of this stuff. Different perspective stuff where you say, wow, I'm not sure I would have picked up on that. But as we look back at it in somebody else's life, it's easy to see, right? God takes their 40 years worth of experience, he condenses it into a chapter, and all of a sudden, voila, it's easy to see what I'm supposed to see. But you stretch that out and you get into the uncomfortableness of the situation and you have to live it out in daily life, and it becomes, can you say, more diluted and almost lost in circumstances, and it's harder to see. At least that's how it is for me. So we can learn from their experience. One more. What about this in verses, where are we even at? Verses 4 through 10. Let me read that to you. It said, your clothing, talking to the Israelites, your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Ladies, How's that for a nightmare experience? 40 years you get to wear the same outfits, never get to go clothes shopping once. Guys, is this a dream come true? 40 years, you don't have to go clothes shopping once. You just have to put on the same thing every day and you're good. See, wilderness isn't so bad after all. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart, here's what you're supposed to pick up. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks and water, of fountains and springs, flowing out of the valleys and the hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig the copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he's given you. He starts out by talking about the experience they're in now. The clothes thing, I could have put that in either section, right? Your clothes don't wear out, God's providing for you. At verse 5, it says, know in your heart, as a man disciplines his son, the Lord God disciplines you, so you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, walking in his ways by fearing him. There's the first part. Disciplining for a while, right? So here's the perception. They've been walking through the wilderness for a long time. That's all some of these people have known. That's all a lot of these people have ever known, walking in the desert. And God is the desert leader, right? The desert tour guide. Some of these people who were not around or not old enough to remember anything else, that's all God has ever been to them. God is the desert tour guide, right? He's the one that wanders around in the desert, and that's all we do. And so the perception here, of course, is God is making me bored and miserable. I'm not very happy here, and I don't like it very well. I'm tired of living in a tent. I've heard stories about people who actually have like houses to live in and gardens to grow stuff and don't have to eat out of the what is it pot every single day. But I've never experienced that. All I've known is the desert. And God says, yeah, well, I'm disciplining you like a person disciplines his son. Ultimately, why were they in the desert, right? Because they rejected God and his provision. They said, I don't want to go into the land full of milk and honey and all kinds of good stuff. So God said, fine, you won't. So they in essence chose to be in the desert. God had to punish them. And yet when God punished a whole lot of other nations, what did that look like? How did that play out? A lot of other nations, when God punishes them, he wiped them off the map. They did not survive. They didn't come back. Game over. Finito. Done. Right? God used disease or oftentimes other armies to come and wipe them out. Think of the Canaanites, right? Think of a lot of other nations that God used Israel to wipe out. Think of how the Assyrians dealt with people later on. A lot of times God judges a nation by wiping them off the map, never to return. How did God punish Israel? He made them walk around in the desert for a while. Now it's not pleasant, but it's a lot better than how God dealt with the others, right? So he disciplines them as somebody would discipline a son. And then the rest of the passage, I got to hurry here, but he goes on to describe the land that they're looking forward to. And how does he describe it? Man, that sounds like paradise. If all you've ever known is the desert, and God describes this, hills, valleys, vines, everything you can think of to eat, all kinds of variety, metals for building stuff, everything you could need, everything you want without scarcity. This is the land God's taking you to. And you kind of drool a little bit and saying, yeah, that's what I want. God's taking you to that. So he disciplines, but he's also promising something better. So he's teaching you to trust in him that someday at the end of the wilderness experience, what's going to come is the good stuff that he is promising you, and that's coming too. God's not just the desert tour guide, right? He's going to provide for you as well. So the reality of the situation isn't just that God is a boring, neglectful God, but it's that God is disciplining me and teaching me trust and endurance. Endurance in that I have to put up with what he's giving me now. Trust that he will bring something better later on that he has promised. Is that not a picture of our lives? We have to go through this life which has a lot of desert in it. But he promised us that someday we will get to what? see him, be with him forever. We'll see him as he is. We'll get to live with him in paradise, in heaven. Do you believe it? Do we trust that? Is the desert that we have to live in now worth what we have to worth what we get to experience later? Well, I hope so. But that's the question. That's what God is teaching the people, and that's what he can teach us as well. I got to stop there. Sorry, I was planning on getting further. But we'll continue this next week, and we'll see what else we can learn from those poor little saps walking around in the sand in the desert. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you this morning. Thank you for this insightful chapter. I'd not noticed a lot of this before when I've read it, and yet every time we read your word, it seems like we learn new things. This is what you had for us this time around, and we see how valuable and how rich it is when you actually lay open your plans for the people. You don't often do that, and yet we can see here how you explain yourself to these people in their lives, and of course by extension you teach us as well for our lives, how the hardship you brought them through wasn't just out of neglect or out of irresponsibility on your part. You had a purpose for it. They were supposed to learn things. You're trying to teach things. You're trying to develop them. You're trying to make them grow. And it's the same thing for us, too, as well. Maybe you're trying to teach different things to different people. Maybe we're supposed to learn different lessons at different times, and yet none of it's by mistake. You know everything that's going on, and there's a reason for it. And even though we don't know why specifically everything that happens to us, and you choose not to disclose that to us, we do know there's something going on. And so help us to always be asking, what are we supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to be picking up on that I haven't learned? And if we can learn to ask that through our lives, I think we'll be much better followers of you. Help us to remember these things and have a better perception of what reality really is. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.